The second generation Mazda CX-5 takes all the things we liked about the original version and finesses them into a smarter, more accomplished and ultimately more appealing package. This model's slightly more spacious and sophisticated than other, cheaper rivals in the mid-sized 5-seat SUV segment, but its trump card remains an involving driving experience that's anything but SUV-like.
Revolution is usually followed by evolution, particularly when it comes to cars. Here's a good example of that, the second generation Mazda CX-5. It's a car with quite an act to follow. Its predecessor was so successful that by the time this Mark II model was introduced in the spring of 2017, CX-5 sales were accounting for more than 25% of Mazda's global production. That original design, launched back in 2012, was a latecomer into the market for Qashqai class family-sized crossover SUVs, and therefore it needed to make an impact. It did, being the first of the brand's cars to feature Kodo Soul of Motion design language and SKYACTIV drivetrain and chassis tech, the two things that have defined every modern Mazda launch since and which have rejuvenated the company's fortunes. By 2017, though, with over 1.5 million sales on the board, it was time for a rethink. Not only was the CX-5's shape becoming a little over-familiar, but other rivals were starting to threaten this Mazda's acknowledged position as one of the best driver's cars in the class. There was also the need to update this SUV with the latest safety and infotainment tech and add in equipment features that couldn't be had on the original version, things that segment buyers were by now demanding, like a powered tailgate and head-up display. So this second generation CX-5 has been evolved in all of those areas in order to counter the increasing threat posed by the new rivals that continue to pour into this sector, most notably in recent times from Vauxhall, Volkswagen, Skoda and Seat. Now Mazda saw no need to go to the expense of a completely new platform or a fundamentally redeveloped range of engines, but we do get a much smarter look, a classier interior, a more rigid body that further improves those drive dynamics and a whole host of new technology features. Will it all be enough, though, to keep this car competitive? Let's find out. Mazda has a long tradition of doing things its own way. From lightweight sports cars to rotary engines, it's not afraid to be different. But just how different can you be with a mid-sized family SUV? A class of car that's actually become quite formulaic, especially when it comes to driving dynamics. Well, in this regard, a lot of brands competing in this segment simply haven't tried very hard, and you can see why. Adding weight and height to a family hatchback platform is, after all, usually a surefire recipe for poorer handling. What can you do other than dull everything down, emphasise comfortable refinement and expect buyers to be satisfied? Well, that's the perspective of most of the volume brands anyway, but it isn't Mazda's. Back in 2012, the Japanese brand introduced what it called SKYACTIV technology, a program aimed at increasing the efficiency of every element of vehicle design, primarily through lightweight. SKYACTIV, we were told, would not only make future Mazda models cheaper to run, but it will also make them more responsive and more involving to drive. Now, with that in mind, you might have expected such an initiative to have been launched with a sports car, perhaps the Hiroshima maker's classic MX-5 Roadster. Instead, the approach debuted with what was, in company terms, a much more significant model, the original version of this CX-5 SUV. This, most people expected, would be just another Japanese family crossover. As it turned out, though, it really was something quite different, a contender that was considerably less weighty than some of its rivals, and one that quickly established itself as arguably the best car in the segment to drive. It was a product of lightweight SKYACTIV thinking and Mazda's celebrated Jimba Itai car and driver as one philosophy. You wouldn't expect this second generation CX-5 model to deviate much from such a successful approach, nor has it. This time around, as before, Mazda talks of this SUV carrying over some of the DNA of that MX-5 sports car. And there is certainly something of that in the sharp steering and the snickety slick shifting 6-speed manual gearbox. Much else is carried over from before too. Few changes having been made to either this crossover's basic platform or to its engine lineup, which does remain fairly limited with a single normally aspirated 2-litre petrol unit and a 2.2-litre turbo diesel that's available in a couple of states of tune. That's not to say that improvements haven't been made. Conscious that some rivals, notably Seat's Attica, have recently set fresh class standards in terms of drive dynamics, Mazda has moved to make this model an even more capable contender when the going gets twisty. This Mark II CX-5's so-called SKYACTIV body is 15% more rigid than before, plus the car benefits from a piece of technology that this brand is very proud of, GVC or G-Vectoring Control. Now this is essentially a more sophisticated take on the kind of torque vectoring system that some other rivals use to reduce wheel spin when you're powering through corners at speed. With GVC, clever electronics sense your steering and throttle positioning as you power into the corner and momentarily reduce the amount of torque being delivered to the front wheels as you turn in. Now that transfers weight to the front axle, which increases front tyre grip and then enables the front wheels to turn in more precisely. Does it work? Well, in a word, yes. In most family cars, and particularly in most family SUVs, there's a momentary delay between steering input and body response, something the improvements I've just described have sought to reduce. This Mazda simply doesn't have that to the same extent that most of its rivals do. And this, in combination with well-controlled body roll and fluid, accurate steering, means that you feel just far more confident pushing on at the wheel of this car. We're really not sure that any other SUV in this class can quite match this feeling of lithe agility. The two products that do get closest to it, Seat's likeable Attica feels like the cheaper, less luxurious car it is, and Ford's Kuga struggles with the prodigious weight of an old tech chassis that sees the volume diesel version weigh in at around 170 kilos heavier than its CX-5 counterpart. Which is all well and good, but many customers in this class simply don't care about how capable their cars are through the corners. So there really isn't much point in creating a crossover of this kind that can't match an eager feel like that with strong standards of ride and refinement. Hence the considerable efforts also made in these two areas with this second generation version of this car. Responsive drive dynamics often come with the drawback of a rather over-firm ride, and to try and control that, Mazda has re-specified and also retuned the dampers. As a result, the ride, although it is still on the firm side of comfortable, is acceptably pliant over the worst undulations and urban potholes. A less dynamically capable rival like Volkswagen's Tiguan would certainly feel more softly sprung, and it would be a little quieter too, although Mazda has undeniably tried hard in this regard, implementing structural and aerodynamic improvements that it says have reduced road noise by an average of 1.3 decibels at 62 miles an hour. Refinement efforts have been directed towards the engines too, or at least the diesel engine anyway. One of the few significant changes beneath the bonnet has been the addition of what the Japanese brand calls a natural sound smoother to the 2.2-litre SKYACTIV-D unit. Now this absorbs some of the forces inside the engine as the pistons fire up and down, so you don't get as much of that telltale diesel clatter. Otherwise, this power plant is pretty much as it was before, developing 150 PS and 380 Nm of pulling power in its volume guys, and that's enough to see 62 mph attainable from rest in 9.4 seconds en route to 127 mph, or 9.6 seconds and 124 mph if you saddle your CX-5 with the extra weight of the optional all-wheel drive system. In its pokier 175 PS state of tune, which is what we're trying here, this diesel engine has to be mated to all-wheel drive, and it really doesn't push this CX-5 along very much quicker at all. The performance stats are 8.8 seconds and 126 miles an hour. This top power plant does, though, deliver an extra 40 newton meters of pulling power, which might make it a better bet if you're a tower. The brake towing limit of all CX-5 diesel models is the same, 2,000 kilos for the manual model or 2,100 kilos if you choose the optional automatic transmission. You certainly won't be a potential tower if you choose the only petrol unit in the range, a 2-litre 165 PS unit. It carries SKYACTIV-G badging, which is supposed to suggest high technology, but in actual fact it's one of the few modern 2-litre engines of any kind that doesn't feature a turbocharger. As a result, low down and mid-range pulling power really suffers. You get exactly half the level of torque that's on offer in this top diesel, which means the necessity to really rev the engine hard to keep up with the traffic flow. On top of that, there's no auto gearbox or all-wheel drive option with green pump fueled CX-5 motoring either. In short, it's very easy to see why most customers for this car end up choosing a diesel. Should their preference be for a 4x4 diesel variant, the kind of CX-5 that we're trying here? Well, you might see why that might be tempting, given that Mazda's intelligent all-wheel drive system is a pretty sophisticated one. Now, like other similar setups in this class, it works with on-demand functionality, but while rival 4x4 packages wait for the wheels to actually lose grip before the all-wheel drive cuts in, the technology here actually anticipates a potential loss of grip using 27 sensors around the car that monitor road conditions and driver intentions. Once the need for extra traction presents itself, up to 50% of the torque can be directed towards the rear wheels. Now, it won't be enough to take you very far off-road, but nobody buys this Mazda to tackle anything more arduous than a light field track or a muddy car park, which is just as well because you don't get the half-decent ground clearance or the hill descent technology that even compromised rivals in this class can sometimes provide. You do, though, get a useful degree of extra tarmac traction with an all-wheel drive CX-5 model, which is all most potential buyers will want. This second generation CX-5 is a lower, sleeker thing than its predecessor, further developing the so-called CODO, soul of motion design philosophy that defined the look of the previous model. This time around, apparently, the styling theme was refined toughness, but the overriding object here seems to have been to bring the looks of this car into line with the more purposeful shaping of its smaller SUV stablemate, the CX-3. Now, that's been done at the same time as maintaining the size differential between those two crossovers. This bigger model measures in at just over 4.5 metres long, and that's 10 millimetres lengthier than before. Time to get up close and personal, starting here at the front, where the grille is more prominent than before thanks to a smarter three-sided pyramid design featuring mesh that curves gently inwards towards the central Mazda badge. Satin chromed lower framing flows up into these so-called signature wings that underscore these slimmer LED headlamps, and those are modelled on those used in the brand's MX-5 sports car. LED technology is also featured in the incorporated daytime running lights and in these beady lower fog lamp bezels, which are pushed right out to the corners of the car to emphasise the width of it. The result of all this is a double dose of attitude. Were this Mazda to appear in your rear view mirror, it'd certainly get your attention. Move around to the side and you get a better perspective of the major thing that's changed with this second generation model. A much lower stance thanks to a significant 35mm reduction in roof height. The central belt line's lower too, framing a side glazing area that looks larger than it actually is thanks to blacked out B and C pillars. That's complemented by rear privacy glass. The panel shaping's more interesting than before too, and it's characterised by this short, high-set rear C-pillar crease that flows from the tail lamp and this longer swage line that rises from the rear door handle and runs to the top of the front wing. A lower crease just above the black plastic-clad door sills gives the flanks some shape, separating wheel arches that are finished with more black plastic cladding, and they house alloy rims that are either 17 or 19 inches in size, depending on the trim level you've selected. We've got the gunmetal finished 19 inches here. As for the rear, well, the look and feel is very much as it was before. This cowled rooftop spoiler and these smeared back three-dimensional lights give a sporty look, while this black plastic trimmed lower section with its twin exhausts is supposed to underscore this Mazda's SUV credentials. A word too for this particular car's optional Soul Red metallic paint that's created using a 3-layer application, 2 of them reflective and translucent. Now apparently this represents a major advance in painting technology, shining with a brighter and deeper luster than before to complement the intricately shaped panel work. Underneath all of this, the platform that this second generation model sits on is basically the same as it was before, although Mazda says that more than 50% of the parts around it have either been changed or completely redesigned. Now, most importantly, the body shell that's bolted to this chassis is 15% stiffer this time around, and that is a major contributor to this Mark II model's further improved driving dynamics. Take a seat at the wheel and you're treated to a masterclass in how it's possible to completely change the look and feel of this part of the cabin without altering any of its essential dimensions or hard points. 2 things are primarily responsible for this, and the first change is predictable given the fact that interior quality was one of the original CX-5 model's biggest flaws. This time around it's a very different story, with an upmarket feel that's clearly been inspired by the German brands that Mazda wants to emulate. Now, the magazines point out that some Teutonic mid-sized SUV products, Volkswagen's Tiguan, for instance, can still improve on what's on offer here. But those writers omit to mention that to get that kind of ambiance, you have to spend an absolute fortune on some of the plushest trim levels. In contrast, even the most affordable CX-5 models feel decently opulent, with most of the surfaces that you regularly interact with being soft to the touch and complemented by silver trimming and smart piano black inserts. If you are able to spend more though, plusher variants like this one feature stitched leather upholstery that's also extended onto the doors, onto the dash and onto the sides of the centre console. It looks particularly smart with this optional stone leather finish. The other key change relates to this, the Centre Dash MZD Connect colour touchscreen that drivers familiar with other recent Mazda models will be well used to, but which is new to the CX-5. With a previous generation design, the infotainment monitor was a pokily shaped thing and it was buried into the centre of the dash. This display gains new eye-line freestanding dash top positioning. It grows in size to 7 inches and it grows in capability too. Incorporated features not only include standard navigation and Bluetooth connectivity, but also Facebook and Twitter integration and AHA-powered internet radio streaming. Plus you get a DAB audio setup and Wi-Fi hotspot functionality that, amongst other things, enables you to use a local search system to find places of interest along your route. You can even set the system up to read out and respond to text messages. Now, what is missing is Apple CarPlay and Android Auto connectivity. Still, on the plus side, the menus are smart and easily navigable, and you get a BMW iDrive style rotary controller for the display down here by the gear stick. So you're not stuck with having to stab away at the touchscreen, smothering it with sticky fingerprints, as is the case with some rivals. Of course, there is more to the cabin changes than merely a bit of extra tinsel and some additional media tech. A host of little details also play their part in making this a much nicer place to be than it was before. The manual gear lever is positioned 40mm higher, so that falls to hand more easily. The redesigned front seats come complete with variable lumbar adjustment. They offer much better core body support and they reduce fatigue on longer trips. And a change of background lighting from orange to white adds a touch more class. There's also this smarter steering wheel with a sporty look that really goes with the whole MX-5 vibe. Through it you view 3 deeply shrouded circular instrument segments. The right-hand one contains a trip computer screen. Now, on this plusher model, you also get a range of satisfyingly sophisticated design touches, like this clear and informative head-up active driving display and the way that the upgraded Bose audio system's tweeters are neatly incorporated into the A-pillars. Talking of the A-pillars, their thinner construction this time around helps front-road visibility, and that's something you particularly notice when you're approaching junctions and roundabouts. Your view sideways and backwards is similarly unimpeded thanks to this large side window area and a decently sized rear screen. As for cabin storage, well, that has also been readdressed, and as a result, the glove box, the door bins and the console box between the seats are all usefully bigger. The glove box is now flock-lined and it's large enough to accommodate a 10-inch tablet, while the console box is fitted out with a 12-volt aux-in and SD card points, plus twin USB ports. Another 12-volt point is situated in this storage tray just in front of the gear lever. Further back between the seats, there's this double cup holder moulded into the console, and you get an overhead compartment for your sunglasses too. Time to take a seat in the rear, which is the point where, if you have a family, you might notice that not all mid-sized SUVs are the same. Some of them have the potential now for 7 seats, of course, but potentially pricier models with that kind of capability, not our focus here. What we will take a moment to point out, though, is that this Mazda is significantly longer than any other contender in the 5-seat mid-sized crossover class. Its 4.55 metre length is far closer to that of a conventional compact SUV like Honda's CR-V or Toyota's RAV4 than it is to more crossover-like hatchback with a backpack style contenders like Nissan's Qashqai and Seat Ateca. Those last two models are both around 180mm shorter in terms of overall length. Now, you won't really appreciate the difference that makes when you're in the front, but it is more evident here in the back. Yes, you might rightly observe that a CR-V or a RAV4 would give you slightly more room all round, but otherwise, by class standards, it really is hard to complain. Now, whereas in a rival Qashqai or an Ateca, or even a slightly bigger competitor like Ford's Kuga, a couple of adults might struggle a little for comfort on a longer trip. Here, you feel like you're in an environment that hasn't solely been designed around the needs of children. I mean, you can stretch out a little with proper space for your head, for your legs and for your shoulders on this more supportive rear bench. And you can stretch back too, thanks to the addition this time around of a reclining seat mechanism, which allows the backrest to be pushed rearwards through 2 stages to an angle of 28 degrees for greater comfort on longer journeys. Now, unfortunately, this hasn't been accompanied by the kind of rear seat sliding system that you could have in a rival Volkswagen Tiguan. As usual in this class of car, it's asking too much to have a rear compartment wide enough to comfortably seat 3 adults, but when there are just 2 of you, it's possible to use this neat centre armrest, which incorporates not only the usual twin cup holders, but also twin USB points and a storage tray with a useful pen slot. Rear-seated folk also get their own twin air vents, plus there are the usual ISOFIX child seat fastening points on the 2 outer seats. The view out, that's reasonably good too, although smaller passengers may find the window line a little high unless they're on a booster cushion. As for finding somewhere to keep smaller items, there are seat back mat pockets and there are small door bins too. Finally, let's take a look in the boot. Now, this is an area of the car accessed on this plusher model by this painfully slow-powered tailgate. Like most other SUVs in this class, the loading sill is a bit higher than it would be in an ordinary family hatch, but it's not so far from the ground as to be insurmountable when you have heavily packed holiday suitcases to fit in. And we had expected that the relatively long length of this CX-5 would have given it a class-leadingly large boot, but in actual fact, the cargo area's 506-litre capacity, that's just 3 litres more than the original design could offer, merely meets the prevailing class standard. To be fair to Mazda, the area provided is significantly bigger than the space you get in a rival Nissan Qashqai or Ford Kuga, and there's certainly enough room for a couple of pushchairs and easily enough width for a typical set of golf clubs. These removable corner floor panels help in that regard. Now, where Mazda has missed a trick is in failing to provide buyers with an adjustable height boot floor. This one can be pulled up to reveal, well, Not a lot of extra underfloor space in this top sport nav variant. Now, the room that would normally be freed up by the brand's questionable decision to deny buyers a standard space-saver spare wheel is here occupied by the subwoofer for the upgraded Bose audio system, which means that on this plush variant you can't even have a spare wheel if you pay extra for one. Now, given that being stuck with a tyre repair kit is never a happy state of affairs in any sort of SUV, we'd recommend that Mazda consider offering buyers the option of run-flat tyres. Away from that, there's not much to take issue over. A useful 12-volt socket is built into the cargo area sidewall, and the rear seatback has a 40-20-40 split, so that if you have longer items like skis to carry, you can push them into the passenger compartment without disturbing a couple of rear-seated occupants. If you do want to push the backrest fully forward, there are sidewall-mounted levers for that purpose. If you tug on those, as much as 1,620 litres of reasonably flat carriage capacity can be freed up. Unlike some of its key Qashqai class rivals, Mazda's not interested in feebly powered entry-level petrol and diesel engines or Spartan, affordably orientated trim levels. Bear that in mind when you're considering pricing that starts from just under £24,000 and ranges up to just over £33,000 for the various models on offer. All of them offer 150 PS or more. The brand gives you just two main well-equipped trim levels, SEL Nav and Plusher Sport Nav, both of which are available if you go for the entry-level option in the range, the SKYACTIV-G 165 PS 2-litre petrol power plant that only comes with two-wheel drive and a manual gearbox. Most customers, though, will find the £2,000 premium to get themselves the alternative 2.2-litre SKYACTIV-D diesel, which requires a budget approaching £26,000 or more. The popular option here is the 150 PS unit, which can be ordered in either two-wheel drive or all-wheel drive forms, with automatic transmission, a £1,500 option in each case if you want it. Now, with this engine, there's a £2,000 premium to pay if you want to progress from two-wheel drive to all-wheel drive. So do make sure you actually need that extra traction. At the top of the range, there's the more potent 175 PS version of that diesel that we're trying here, and that's only offered paired with all-wheel drive and only available with top Sport Nav trim, which accounts for asking prices which from launch began at around £31,500. At this level in the lineup, the option price for automatic transmission rises to £1,800. Enough on the range. What about rivals in the 5-seat Qashqai class sector of the SUV market? Well, in considering these, you have to remember that virtually all the models that come to mind have price lists that begin with lower powered 1.2, 1.5 or 1.6 litre variants, which don't really directly compare to what's on offer in this CX-5 lineup. For relevant comparisons, then, you'll have to limit your opposition search to crossovers in this class in their pokier guises. Now, do that, and this Mazda can look very good value. In fact, a number of obvious competitors will be significantly pricier than this CX-5. More feebly powered Nissan Qashqai 1.6 DCI 130, for example, costs over £1,000 more, while the least expensive 2-litre Blue HDI diesel version of Peugeot's 3008 is around £3,500 more. Less surprising as the news that you'll need £2,000 to £3,000 more for comparable versions of premium badged models in this class, like BMW's X1, Audi's Q3 and Mercedes GLA. So, what is comparably priced then? Well, you're going to need the same kind of budget that Mazda's asking here if you want an equivalent 2-litre diesel version of a rival like Ford's Kuga, Volkswagen's Tiguan, Hyundai's Tucson, Honda's CR-V and Mini's Countryman, also Toyota's RAV4. And don't expect to save much in choosing competitors like, say, Subaru's XV or Mitsubishi's Eclipse Cross, or indeed a 2-litre diesel version of Vauxhall's Grandland X or Skoda's Karoq. As for other popular segment alternatives, well, you might save £1,000 or so if you choose a comparable Renault Kadjar 1.6-litre DCI 130, Kia Sportage 2-litre CRDI, or a 2-litre TDI Seat Attica. Otherwise, there's only the really cheap MG GS, but there you really get what you don't pay for. Of course, with all these comments, we've assumed that you really do want a car in this class with more than 150 PS, and you really do want a spacious family hatchback-based crossover SUV rather than a smaller super mini-based, more compact one. Now, if neither of those things are true, then there are obviously lots of cheaper choices you could make. As we've already said, most of the SUVs we've already mentioned are available with the kind of smaller, less expensive engines that you can't have in this Mazda. So if you look at saving a few thousand and get yourself one of the bigger super mini based crossover models, you'll also be primarily limited to less powerful units of that sort. So we're thinking here of contenders like Honda's HR-V, Jeep's Renegade or Suzuki's SX4 S-Cross. Mazda, though, it says quite rightly that crossovers of that sort are more directly targeted by its smaller CX-3 model. If, having considered all of that, you conclude that it is a CX-5 that you really want, then you're going to feel quite vindicated in your choice when you come to study the standard specification tally, because it is pretty comprehensive. Even base SEL nav trim comes with 17-inch alloy wheels, LED headlights that include LED daytime running lamps and fog lights, auto headlamps and wipers, and heated power folding mirrors, plus rear privacy glass, front and rear parking sensors, and the brand's sophisticated GVC G-Vectoring Control system for extra traction through the turns. Inside, the primary feature is a standard 7-inch centre dash MZD Connect colour touchscreen, and that incorporates satellite navigation, integrated Bluetooth, 6-speaker DAB audio system, and app integration for internet radio, Facebook and Twitter. Plus, you get the usual USB and iPod ports. Other interior features include dual-zone climate control, leather for the gear knob and the multifunction steering wheel, an auto-dimming rear-view mirror, and a 40-20-40 split backrest for the reclinable rear seats. If you want more, then you'll want the plusher Sport Nav trim level that we have here. That adds to that tallow with 19-inch gunmetal alloy wheels, keyless entry and a powered tailgate. Inside, in a Sport Nav variant, you'll find full leather upholstery, heat for the steering wheel and the electrically powered front seats, a head-up display, a 10-speaker premium Bose sound system, a reversing camera and a wiper de-icer system to help clear the windscreen faster in cold weather. The 175 PS diesel model gets a powered sunroof too. So, on to options. If you don't want your CX-5 to be finished in Arctic white, you'll have to stump up for one of the extra cost paint shades, which come with either metallic, mica or pearlescent finishes, the nicest of which, in our opinion, is this car's Soul Red Crystal hue. Go for a Sport Nav variant and you'll be offered the opportunity to pay extra for adaptive Mazda radar cruise control that will automatically vary your speed for you on the highway. You might also like to upgrade the sat nav with a premium connected services package that brings live traffic updates, weather information and where to find the lowest cost fuel. Plus, it really lifts the cabin if you can change the standard Sport Nav black leather upholstery for the lighter stone leather trim that we've been trying here. As for other options, well, you can give your CX-5 a sportier look by adding items like front and rear undergarnish strips, black or silver mirror caps and silver skirts for the front spoiler and the side air dam. Plus, buyers of SEL nav variants get to specify a different style of 17-inch alloy wheel if they wish. You can smarten the interior with an interior LED lighting kit and welcome LED illumination. And practical extras include a spare wheel, mud flaps, a rear bumper step protector and a detachable tow bar, which can be ordered with an attachment for bikes. We would also want to add roof rails to which you can attach crossbars for the transport of things like bikes, skis or a roof box. That's enough about the luxury side of life. What about standard safety kit in the CX-5? Well, it's no longer acceptable to launch a car in this class without the inclusion of autonomous braking, hence the standardisation of Mazda's Smart City Brake Support System. As with other such setups, this one scans the road ahead in search of potential collision hazards as you drive at speeds of up to 50 miles an hour, and it has particular emphasis on identifying errant pedestrians. If a person or an object you might be imminently about to hit is detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond, or well, perhaps you aren't able to, the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. Now that's backed up by a secondary collision reduction that keeps the anchors on in the event of an accident to stop the car hitting anything else. In addition, there's traffic sign recognition that pictures road signs as you pass and then displays them for you on the dash. And of course, there are all the usual, more familiar safety features, so things like twin front, side and curtain airbags, ISOFIX child seat mounts on the two outer rear chairs, tyre pressure monitoring, hill start assist, and the usual electronic systems to control traction and stability. Plus, there's also ABS braking, of course, with a brake assist function that'll help in panic braking, and that will be advertised to following motorists by the automatically activating hazard flashes of the emergency stop signalling system. If you want to go further, then you'll need to have specified a top-spec Sport Nav diesel model like this one. If so, you'll be offered an extra cost safety pack that includes 6 additional camera-driven features. Blind spot monitoring works at over 90 miles an hour to stop you from pulling out to overtake if there's a vehicle in your blind spot. Rear cross traffic alert will warn you of oncoming vehicles if you're reversing out of a space. Adaptive LED headlights automatically dip themselves for you at night in the face of oncoming traffic. Driver attention assist works at over 40 miles an hour to monitor your reactions for drowsiness, and it'll warn you if a reduction in driver response reveals a need to stop for a restorative coffee. Rear smart city brake support prepares the car for impact from behind. And finally, lane keep assist works at speeds of over 38 miles an hour to alert you if you drift out of your lane on the highway before gently steering you back to where you should be. Here is something unusual, a new generation model that actually delivers fuel and CO2 returns inferior to its predecessor. Now you might think that particularly strange in this instance, given all the fuss Mazda makes about SKYACTIV technology, which is supposed to be primarily geared towards improving running cost efficiency. Like us, you might think it difficult for the Japanese maker to maintain that stance when the frugality and cleanliness of this second generation CX-5 are beaten by just about every direct segment rival. To be fair, the differences aren't great, and in real world terms they might very well not exist at all. How so? Well, let's try and explain. Ever since the Volkswagen Gate fiasco in 2016, car makers have been coming under increasing pressure to design engines that are clean and frugal in the real world, not just in the NEDC rated efficiency tests. Mazda reckons that it's one of the first brands to do exactly that, and maintains that the figures it quotes are actually achievable by Mr. and Mrs. Average on the school run, on the supermarket trip, or on the annual skiing jaunt to Chamonix. Our subjective experience with this car seems to bear this out. Over 50 mpg in this diesel variant seems readily achievable in touring use. Even bearing all this in mind, though, it is still a little disconcerting to find that the volume 2.2 litre diesel-powered 150 PS SKYACTIV-D model that back in 2012 we were told by Mazda would manage 61.4 mpg on the combined cycle and 119 grams per kilometre of CO2 can in second generation form apparently deliver only 56.5 mpg and 132 grams per kilometre. The brand says that the modest increase in weight necessary to deliver this second generation model's refinement improvements are another contributory factor in this discrepancy. Well, maybe so. It's certainly telling that in diesel form the figures of this Mazda are hardly any different to those of arguably its closest rival, Volkswagen's Tiguan 2-litre TDI 150 PS model. At the time of the launch of this second generation CX-5, the Wolfsburg brand was one of the only other makers who had realigned their model efficiency stats to real-world levels. Still, we can of course only quote you what the manufacturers quote us, and on that basis, comparably powered rivals apparently do significantly better. Now, if you do accept Mazda's arguments and stick with this CX-5, you will at least be spared significant efficiency penalties for equipping your car with either all-wheel drive or with automatic transmission, or potentially both things. Think in terms of an 8 to 10% deterioration in your fuel and CO2 figures in either case, and you won't be too far wrong. Diesel buyers who do trade up to the Pokia 175 PS variant that we're trying here won't be particularly heavily penalised either. Expect 54.3 mpg on the combined cycle and 142 grams per kilometre of CO2 from a manual 175 PS model like this one, which is pretty much identical to the figures you get from the all-wheel drive version of the lesser 150 PS derivative. What we might be tempted to steer you away from doing is plumping for the 2-litre 165 PS petrol version. Here again, the figures aren't anything to write home about. 47.1 mpg on the combined cycle and 149 grams per kilometre. The difference in this case, though, is that we're not sure that those stats really would be achievable in real-world conditions. The normally aspirated nature of this SKYACTIV-G engine leaves you often having to thrash it around to keep up with the flow of traffic, and that really does take its toll on economy. To be fair, though, the same could be said of the equally unsophisticated 1.6-litre GDI petrol power plant you'll find fitted to a rival Kia Sportage or Hyundai Tucson, and plenty of people buy those. Mazda's iStop technology is included as part of every CX-5 SKYACTIV package, and that's there to switch the engine off when the car's stopped in traffic. A fuel economy monitor segment of the MZD Connect infotainment screen allows you to monitor the iStop system's operation and see how much it's positively affecting your driving range. And the same screen will also tell you how long you've spent idling while stationary during your current journey, although we're not really sure why you'd ever want to know that. More useful are the graphical fuel economy readouts that cover both the trip you're on and your historical efforts when it comes to frugality. Bodywork that is 6% sleeker this time around obviously helps here, and that's aided on the petrol model by an active air shutter in the front grille. If you have a 4x4 variant like this one, then you'll also appreciate the way that the intelligent all-wheel drive system keeps you front-driven for the maximum amount of time possible. On to the other things you'll need to consider when it comes to running cost returns. Your CX-5 will require a service every 12 months or every 12,500 miles, depending which comes around sooner. You'll be offered an option of a fixed price maintenance plan, which covers all scheduled servicing with parts and labour for 3 years or 37,500 miles. Owners can keep up to date with their car's maintenance schedule via the Instrument Binnacle trip computer screen and the applications section of the MZD Connect Centre Dash monitor. To help you keep track of what work's been carried out, you can access a digital service record online, and you can use a useful My Mazda app to receive reminders about servicing, to book your car in at your local dealership, and to access a digitally stored record of your model service history. What else? Residual values. Well, this Mazda does well here. Independent experts reckoning that a CX-5 will return between 42 and 46% of its original purchase price after the usual 3-year, 60,000 mile operating period. The variance depends on the derivative you choose. That puts this SUV on a par with strong performing rivals like Volkswagen's Tiguan and even Audi's Q3. As a result, leasing costs for this CX-5 are competitive, even when they're compared to some crossovers in this segment that feature a lower sticker price. Now, we should also mention the warranty. That's the usual unremarkable 3-year, 60,000 mile package. If you want to extend that, you can do so via optional Essential, Elite and Complete plans. Included in the standard package is a 3-year paintwork warranty and 12 years of anti-perforation cover. In addition, there's a Mazda accident aftercare scheme, which sees the company liaise with your insurer after an accident, making sure you have access to a courtesy car if you need one, and ensuring that all the repairs are carried out to full Mazda standards. Finally, let's tell you about insurance. If you opt for the 2-litre petrol model, you'll pay a premium based on a Group 17E or 18E rating. That depends on the trim level you prefer. For the 150 PS 2.2-litre turbo diesel variant, you're looking at Group 19E for two-wheel drive or all-wheel drive SEL nav models, or Group 20E for the two all-wheel drive Sport Nav variants. This 175 PS Sport Nav all-wheel drive model is rated at Group 23E. Now, there's no grouping incentive to opt for the extra camera-based elements provided by the extra cost safety pack. It really is about time that the insurance industry started playing its part in incentivising drivers to take features like that seriously. The CX-5 was never one of those cars that jumped out at you on first acquaintance. It still isn't, but as with many Mazdas, its modesty hides a surprisingly engaging product, one that's well packaged, nicely made and very smart to look at. Add in a high specification and competitive pricing and you have a strong proposition. Of course, these days nothing less than that is necessary given the fierce competition in the Qashqai class segment. As before, the best thing about this car is the way it drives, and that's something that's even further improved this time around by the stiffer body and the addition of the G-Vectoring Control system. As a result, if you want to be rewarded at the wheel in an SUV of this sort, the CX-5 is right up there with Seat's Ateca as a class leader in this segment. Virtually every other contender in the sector feels dull by comparison. Unfortunately for Mazda, that's not the only attribute that matters for potential buyers. A number of these people will be disappointed that there isn't a wider engine range on offer, and a few of them may, like us, be a little disappointed to find that despite all the trumpeted SKYACTIV efficiency technology, fuel and CO2 readings have actually slipped backwards with this Mark II model. Now, primarily that is down to the fact that the Japanese brand has done so little to develop its engine wear as part of a second generation model redesign that's needed to incorporate so much extra relatively weighty technology. It's just as well then that the technology in question is definitely worth having, developed with the distinctly Mazda-minded approach that characterises the rest of the car. After a week with it, we decided that although there were probably more sensible choices we could have made if we'd been buying this class, there weren't many more appealing ones. Try a CX-5 for yourself, and we have a hunch that you might end up feeling just the same.